people, we not gonna get nothing. Not by sitting around here doing these sitting demonstrations and nothing. People not gonna do anything.
Well, how are we gonna do it?
By violence. Violence. By uprising, having a revolution.
But there are 20 million of us.
20 million. That's enough.
Not these days and not in those years.
Oh, it's enough.
They're scattered. 48 states.
48 states get them together.
How?
How? Through Islam.
What?
The true religion, you know? Get all the people together, get all them believing one thing, and then they can't help but stick together. I mean, we can't stick together now. Half of us Christians, the other half Baptists, you know, some Jews and all that. How what good is that going to do us? Yeah.
So you think the only thing we can do
is get together?
Have an armed uprising?
Really?
Kill up.
Just put blood, you know. Let everybody bleed a little bit. That's the only way we're going to get it.
You're listening to the Bean Pie Chronicles podcast. So kick off your leather socks and unpin your head wrap. The Bean Pie Chronicles is now on the air.
Assalamualaikum lama. Just want to see if you're alive in the house.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Hope all is well. 1212. Yeah, we're back with a new episode of BPC, the Bean Pie Chronicles.
All praise be
welcome
to
back,
Allah.
everyone. Before we get into this, please remember, like and subscribe, share. You know what I'm saying? Let's get this out. Help us build this channel up, inshallah. Right quick, recently I became aware of a film that was done by PBS entitled something about the influence of Islam in the 1920s on black Americans and things of that nature. So I took a look at it, and you know, I was somewhat alarmed but not surprised, unfortunately, by what I saw. And I thought it would be important to do a sort of like go over this presentation so that I can essentially show you guys what I saw and share with you what I saw, how tricknology, an idea that was brought forward by the Nation of Islam, if I'm not mistaken, and it basically describes how the dominant society uses technology, basically mind control, and to push narratives and to do what we call social engineering. How do you enslave people in an open and free society? Well, the answer is tricknology. So this project is an excellent example of tricknology, and it's of particular importance because the target of this tricknology is the Bean Pie community, the African American Muslim community. And I think that I would like to, you know, take a look at this project, and I'm gonna stop it quite a bit. I'm gonna take breaks to show you how tricknology is being used, or how tricknology is being employed with this project for the purpose of undermining and I guess almost officially severing the ties between Islam and black liberation theology. So before, without any further ado, let's get into it.
Chicago, the beating heart of the Midwest. Muslim roots run deep here, especially in black communities. That history is captured in this photograph. It's the first known image of a group of visibly Muslim black American women. And it was...
All right, I would have to, again, I'm not going to apologize any further for having to stop. I kind of pre-warned you. Visibly, identifiably Muslim women. I don't think that anybody in their modern times would look at this picture and say that these are visually or visibly identifiable Muslim women. This young lady here is the closest thing to what some women, Muslim women, end up presenting, but none of this here would be easily recognizable or associated with the aesthetics of a black Muslim woman. I think it's important to point that out, because the language that she used would have suggested that would be incorrect. But I think an important idea that she may have inadvertently exposed is that the truth of the matter is, in a Western environment in America, what Muslims choose to identify themselves with as an expression of their Islamic aesthetic is completely arbitrary and completely up to them. It doesn't, unlike today, in many cases where people feel like you have to be dressed like someone from Arab land or traditionally a land of traditionally Muslim cultures, we cosplaying. The truth of the matter is that it's up to you to decide what exactly Muslims look like in your environment and in your culture. Islam provides parameters for what is acceptable and what is unacceptable, but within that confine, then it's up to you to decide. So there's no need for African American Muslim women in America to walk around dressed up like they're in the middle of the desert, or they've adopted the cultural dress of some other group of people, as opposed to creating something, creating industry, creating economics for yourself by creating what that look is, and then creating the industry and the economic industrialness, the industry to provide clothing for yourself. So there's an opportunity there, and far too often, again, we're consumers of culture because we're consumers of everything, even religion.
Was taken in Chicago 100 years ago, in 1922. How did you come across this photograph?
I started researching the history of Islam and Muslims in the United States. I kept seeing this particular image. And it was just kind of put there as an indicator that women were present in this history. And I started asking, who were these women?
And my first thing that comes out to me is this crown, black church hat.
Okay, so he correctly identifies the aesthetic, the black church hat. So are we saying that the black church hat has been converted into identifiably Muslim garb? Are the Muslim women today wearing church hats as part of their identification as Muslim women? There's no continuity. And so what I'm trying to say, that this is a piece of documentary, is a piece of propaganda, because they're trying to create continuity between modern day Islam in the black community and this organization, this movement that these women were a part of. And I want to say that there's very little to no connection between these two organizations and these two conditions.
Who are these women, and what does it mean for them to have, this, be wrapped up like this at this time in America?
You can't tell the story of America without the story of black people. And you can't tell the story of Muslims in America without the story of African American Muslims.
I call them visionaries. They're seeing the world.
Okay, so I just wanted to take a break, stop here to give some context. If you read this is a periodical that was put together by the Ahmediyya Movement. So if you read it here, it says, since the last report published in the Muslim Sunrise for July 1922, the following ladies and gentlemen have accepted Islam and joined the Ahmediyya Movement. So if you don't know, the Ahmediyya movement is a heretical movement. It's not accepted as normative Islam. It's a bid'ah movement, innovative movement, a movement of innovation. And the founder, Ghulam Ahmed, said that he is the messenger of Allah. And they created a Quran with dubious translations to support his claim. That essentially assert that, there were prophets after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, essentially, under normal context, this community, and by extension these African American women, would be seen as victims of some deception on behalf of these individuals, And also, if you want to see, they appear to be changing individuals' names. They said their new Muslim names are given along with their old American names. So a Muslim is a religion and a belief system, and an American is a nationality. So just because they became Muslim doesn't change their nationality. So we today, hindsight being 2020, we know that this practice is not only disruptive, but it's not required for you to change your name.
Through this newfound lens of being Muslim, that's unprecedented.
In the 1950s, a Muslim organization began to inspire Black Americans across the country.
Everybody in Harlem is a Muslim.
Leaders like Malcolm X and members like Muhammad Ali soon made...
Okay, so I want to make this point here and highlight this point. If you want to say the Nation of Islam, the Nation of Islam had a leader, one leader, and that was Elijah Muhammad, the man behind this podium here. You have to notice, or I noticed, that they didn't mention his name. They said leaders like Malcolm X and followers like Muhammad Ali. When all intents and purposes, they had one leader who is Elijah Muhammad and followers like Malcolm X. Malcolm X was a follower of Elijah Muhammad. He wasn't a leader of the Nation of Islam. He was a national spokesman, one of the ministers, a minister Malcolm. There were other ministers as well. But the leadership of the Nation of Islam, for all intents and purposes, was singular, and their leadership was essentially a reflection of how well they were supporting Elijah Muhammad's mission. So to mention the Nation of Islam and then say the leaders and don't mention Elijah Muhammad's name, but mention Muhammad Ali as a leader of the Nation of Islam. Well, Muhammad Ali was mentioned as a follower, which he was. But without mentioning the leader, I don't see how, if this is a piece of education, this is supposed to be an educational project, this has to be seen as intentional.
And members like Muhammad Ali soon made the Nation of Islam.
Is a Muslim.
Leaders like Malcolm X and members like Muhammad Ali soon made the Nation of Islam a household name.
I've been all over, and everybody know and are talking about the Muslims in America.
The nation became so well known, it's easy to think the recent history of Black American Muslims starts here.
Okay, so this is the crux and the focal point and the purpose of this document. This is a piece of propaganda designed or intended to displace the Nation of Islam and undermine the fact that it is the primary influence of what we would call Black Muslims today. So what they want to do here, what they're trying to do here is basically say that Islam, or in its the 1950s, the Nation of Islam was the prominent face of Islam, but they want to go back to Ahmediyya movement of the 1920s to restart the date, which was inaccurate. You know, the Ahmediyya movement was one of many movements that started as early as 1920s. The Nation of Islam itself had some iterations in the 1920s, but may have officially started in the 1930s. So to talk about the Nation of Islam in its prominence in the 1950s, that might have been out of 20 years of work. That Ahmadiyya movement never reached the prominence of the Nation of Islam because of the inherent weakness of its message as it relates to Black America and Black Muslims. Ultimately, what ultimately became the Black Muslim movement. The Nation of Islam, on the other hand, had a much more resonant message.
How did you happen to join the Muslim movement?
I was in prison. I was a very wayward, criminal, backward, illiterate, uneducated, and whatever other negative characteristics you can think of type of person until I heard the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And because of the impact that it had upon me in giving me a desire to reform myself and rehabilitate myself for the first time in my life, and also being able to see the effect that it had upon others, this is what made me accept it. And plus, prior to hearing what he teaches, I had no interest whatsoever in anything serious or any kind of educational pursuits. And I noticed that after being exposed to the religious teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, immediately it instilled within me such a high degree of racial pride and racial dignity that I wanted to be somebody. And I realized that I couldn't be anybody by begging the white man for what he had, but that I had to get out here and try and do something for myself or make something out of myself.
Than the Ahmadiyya movement. And so to try to connect the modern current state of Black Muslims to the Ahmadiyya movement is disingenuous, when the fact of the matter is that the Nation of Islam is a far better candidate for that origin story, and it's not only far better candidate, it's far more truthful. This is disingenuous.
But the story goes back much further, as the photograph of the 4 American Muslim ladies makes clear. It was taken 30 years before the Nation of Islam came to prominence.
She said that it was taken 30 years before the nation came to prominence, meaning a household name. But it wasn't taken 30 years before the Nation of Islam was established. At best, it was 8 years. At best.
Where was this photograph taken?
On the south side of Chicago in
Where I'm
1920, and where you're from, right? It was from a journal of the Ahmadiyya.
I'd like to point out here that, again, Black Muslims need to stop being pedestrians in their own reality. And what I mean by that is that this Asian woman, who may or may not be Muslim, is telling this Black woman her own culture, to the point where she said, you know, this is the south side of Chicago where you're from. So the question I may ask is, where are the institutions created by the Ahmadiyya movement or by these Black Muslims? If you want to say the Ahmadiyya is the source of your influence, how come this woman is teaching you your own culture? She's teaching you your own culture because you actually are not connected. One, you're not connected to the Ahmadiyya movement as this documentary is trying to pose, and two, your community or our community does not or has not is guilty of being, again, pedestrians in your own reality, because you should be educating her. Just like you, where's the critical race theory created by yourself to tell your story to your own people, which is the basis of your community? You know, so those Ahmadiyya people were sending reports back to Karachi, India, because they were essentially sent out to colonize or put a footprint for the Ahmadiyya movement in America. And like all immigrants, you find it easier to access America through the black community that's open. They're open arms to foreigners to be exploited, and so we have to do better at preserving our own narrative and not having our narratives fed to us through people from outside of the community.
A movement in Islam called the Muslim Sunrise. I think it's still published now sporadically. They would list the names of people who converted, and I looked for the names of these women. And what I found is they all converted within a month or two of each other. Then I was able to look through census records, and I looked for all of them. But only one of the women emerged continuously from the decades before the photograph was taken into the years after the photograph was taken, and that was Florence Watts.
But who was this woman? And what can she tell us about the early history of Black American Muslim communities? Piecing this story together begins with Florence's first appearance in the public record. Of all the northern cities people migrated to, Chicago had a special appeal. It's where Florence moved to from DC, just before my own ancestors arrived, on their journeys out of the South.
The thing about Chicago, starting in the 1910s, is it was seen as this fabulous place of opportunity.
Florence's decision to make Chicago her home makes her story feel very personal to me and to my sister, who still lives and works here.
It's on days like today that I'm really happy that our great-grandparents chose Chicago. Gorgeous.
They sisters for real.
They all came here in the Great Migration, which I've only recently begun to think of as a refugee story.
Mommy's parents' family really kind of landed in Chicago, in some ways really actively fleeing the terror of the South, fleeing a potential mob.
The migration here, the choosing of Chicago, and just the search for something more for their families. I feel like in telling the story of Florence, I am also retelling the story of our grandparents, our great-grandparents, even our parents.
So one of the other things I also found is that when Florence is in Washington...
I put good money on if you talk to her parents, that they have their story of how they came to Islam. And I would put good money on, there's a chance, obviously, if there's an Ahmadiyya community there, that they are directly connected to the Ahmadiyya movement. And if this is a commercial for the Ahmadiyya movement, which in some ways it can be, because there's people that may have never known about the Ahmadiyya movement, and now you will know about it now. And some may even believe that, as this document is trying to present, that the Ahmadiyya movement has had this tremendous direct influence over the current state of African American Islam in North America, that again would be somewhat disingenuous. Her last name being Bilal would lead me to think that somewhere in there's some influence over some influence of the Nation of Islam, and more probable would be the Imam WD community, because they tapped into the whole Bilal narrative. So I would be curious to know, what her actual journey was, as opposed to, the presumptive journey.
In DC, she meets a man named George Watts. And it's there that she marries George. And so when she goes to Chicago, she does not go alone. She goes with George as a married woman, and that's when her name changes from Florence Sullivan to Florence Watts. She arrives in Chicago around 1910, 1911. In 1912, a momentous occasion occurs for her. Her daughter, Aurelia Watts, who's born.
Her first child?
Yes, this is her first and only child.
Okay.
The next time we find Florence in the records is in 1920, when Florence is living in Evanston, Illinois, not in Chicago, working as a domestic.
So I spent 4 years in Evanston. It's a wealthy, predominantly white suburb of Chicago. What was it like when Florence was there?
Well, it was almost an entirely white suburb, save for the domestics and those who worked for wealthy white families, which is what Florence did. She probably lived in a small room, the servants' quarters. We find Aurelia in the census in 1920, not with her mother in Evanston, but at a boarding school for girls. It was a school for orphans and destitute children.
So this this part here was interesting to me because apparently this woman was married and had a child, and then somehow or another we just jumped to the daughter is in a home for orphans and destitute. She's obviously not an orphan, so destitute meaning impoverished. And so where is the father? Where is the husband? And so it's uncomfortable, especially for me as a black man. You're aware of the attempt by society to drive a wedge between the black man and the black woman, to try to undermine the black household. And so the way that this story is told sort of projects that same type of narrative way back into the 1930s, 1920s, and they just smoothly just glance over the fact that, like, where is the husband in this equation? So I just wanted to point that out.
Aurelia is 8 years old.
So her mother is employed, but her daughter can't be with her, so she's sent to this school.
Right. You see here the types of separation that these arrangements caused within black families. The sense of necessity that would have compelled her to make such a difficult decision, it's absolutely devastating.
So, again, of course we can agree and understand that this story is based on this picture of this group of black women, and so therefore the black woman is the focal point of the story. But in real life, the story of the black family is the story of the black man and the black woman. So the same way that this woman made some sacrifices, apparently, who knows, who understands the context, her husband made the same, you must assume, or we should assume, made a similar sacrifice, whether he died or what happened to him. And it's just again, the tricknology works through subtle omissions, gaps left in the story, things you have to infer, and just narrative creation. So I feel like this is a little bit of a slick attempt to project this strong black woman narrative. Not that the strong black woman narrative is inaccurate, but it does go against the natural reality, because there are typically men involved. There's a black man involved with this situation.
It's quite a thing that in the Midwest that both immigrants and black people are promised streets paved with gold. easy opportunity. That wasn't the case for either of them.
For immigrants coming from outside of the United States, America is this place of promise. America has never betrayed them.
So here we go again with the attempt to try to wedge the immigrant story into the African American story. And you have you hear again, it's just subtle stuff. You have a white family, the immigrants, not the white family that this sister was working for, a white immigrant family, and you see men and women. You see the husbands, the men, the boys, the women sitting at a table. You see the family. But the black story you tell is a story of your child is in the home for destitute children and orphans. Okay, so to try to weave this story as though America owes or had the same promise for black Americans that it had for immigrants is inaccurate. These people here, immigrants they may be, but at the end of the day, they're white people, and they were able to assimilate into whiteness, whereas these black women were never given opportunity, and black men and women were never given opportunity to assimilate into whiteness. So let's be clear about that.
America has never enslaved them. For African American migrants from the South to the North, while they have the same hopes and dreams of immigrants, when they encounter these same types of conditions, it feels like yet another betrayal.
Florence, so she's without her young daughter, she's without her extended family. Where does she turn for solace? What do we know?
Community, connection, support, friendship. And like so many at that time, Florence begins to look for a spiritual home.
Religion plays a crucial role in the formation of an African American people.
After the Civil War, during freedom.
All right, so I want to point out that this part or portion is completely a piece of propaganda on behalf of the black church, because the question was asked about the particular woman's where does she go for solace and community, and then we get this narrative here about the black church indicating that she was a member of some black church. And if I may be mistaken, but they don't go on to show that she was part of a black church. To talk about religion and the black church in particular, and not talk about how the black church was given to slaves as part of the indoctrination process and part of making them comfortable and submit to their role as slaves. So the role of the church in the history of black America is that the church was given to slaves in order to pacify them and make them docile, and as they are enslaved and oppressed by their slave masters. So there were slave Bibles, and that highlighted chapters and verses that sold or taught or prescribed obedience to your master, and highlighted obedience to one's master as being congruent with being a solid Christian. So religion was weaponized against the black man in black America. I want to pull back a little bit.
After the Civil War, during freedom, during the era of Jim Crow, the black church emerges as the most popular institution of civil society. It's not just where you go to pray or to sing. It's where you do business. It's where you meet your potential marriage partner. It's called a nation within a nation.
When you look at what was happening during chattel slavery, the major thing that was lost was responsibility.
That's false. So when she says the definite article, the major thing that was lost during chattel slavery was not responsibility, because slaves were responsible for getting 200 pounds of cotton in per day, and responsible for fulfilling the needs of the plantation. What was stolen or what was taken away was your identity, your own sense of purpose, your own sense of self-preservation, your name, your religion, your God, and it was replaced with white supremacy. It was replaced with white Jesus. It was replaced with the white church. It was replaced with the white Bible. So that's an inaccurate statement that she's making. And like I said, the tricknology goes all the way back to educating people or miseducating people so that they can further the miseducation of their own people. So the tricknology works essentially by what they call misinformation and disinformation and diversion. This piece of propaganda is a diversion. They want you to look over here, and that means you're not going to look over here. And what I want to point out to is they've gone out of their way to try to connect to a foreign based religious practice, even if it's heretical. Ahmadiyya is seen as outside of Islam in the Muslim world, but they would rather connect you to the Ahmadiyya movement than to let you have any connection to the Nation of Islam, because the Nation of Islam keeps their foot on the neck of the white supremacy and the white system that has been oppressing black people for 400 years.
Including your very body, your children, your marriage, your union, your community, your economy, your life. So when we get to these cities, of course, religion is one of the ways that African Americans immediately begin to exercise their own agency.
It's not actually your own agency if it doesn't provide you with a paradigm that's outside of the paradigm that you were given by your slave masters. And this is the problem with African American culture to this day. It has been confined to the options and the variables that have been prescribed for black people by the dominant society. And so that's why the church was ultimately deemed ineffective for the purpose of black liberation. And the same thing goes for the Ahmadiyya movement.
Most African Americans throughout the 20th century are going to remain Christian. But the church was not the only religious institution in Black America.
And it is...
All right, so what statement? That's a false statement again. What other institution, religious institution, was part of, that element of Black American history? 1920s, were you saying that there was a Buddhist, black Buddhist monk monastery? Was there a black, there wasn't no real black masjids. There wasn't no black synagogues. There was no black. Everything that was in relation to blacks and religion was essentially centered in the church. There might have been some other type of dogmas around, but he said institutions. Institution is not some guy handing out some flyer or some kind of dawah track. An institution means organized centers of learning and such. And I would ask him to provide some evidence for that statement. What other organization, what other institutions, religious institutions, were prominent in the black community in the 1920s and 30s?
Is in this time, in the 1920s, that there's an enormous sort of new energy around spiritual movements, in particular for African Americans, because you have this wave of new political fervor and consciousness that's emerging as well through groups like the Universal Negro Improvement Association, led by Marcus Garvey.
It's not a religious organization.
There was a spirit of black
Shout
nationalism.
Out to the brother. Hats off. Marcus Garvey. Big up yourself every time, the Jamaican brothers.
African Americans were thinking about an alternative to Christianity, to integrate their spiritual and religious practice into this newfound politics of black liberation.
I think for people who were drawn to Islam during this period, people like Florence, many of them appealed to a sense of ancestral legacy that Islam...
Shout out to Brother Noble Drew Ali. Again, they have a way of showing pictures and showing important figures, black men, in that are more influential in Islam in Chicago, more influential among blacks in Chicago. But they won't mention their name. It's almost like on some Voldemort, Harry Potter stuff. Like, mention the black man's name that did this work that you're trying to project onto these women. Shout out to these sisters. I'm not trying to, I don't want no smoke, but it's a deliberate attempt to nullify and dismiss the black man in this struggle here, and that's unfortunate.
Was a recovery of a lost history that had been disrupted through slavery, but there's also something new. Islam, as it is presented in this moment, it is familiar enough in the spiritual sense, but new enough to introduce a different kind of political discourse. A discourse that challenges racism.
But why Islam and not another religious tradition? Well, Islam from the 1800s on is associated with resistance to European colonialism and imperialism, and not...
That's nonsense. So this is the influence of the modern day foreigner and their need to interject themselves into this history. The reason Islam, the correct answer to this question that this man gave the wrong answer to, as far as Western imperialism, that was not on the minds of black people in the 1920s. They wouldn't even have known what the hell that was. What they did know was racism. What they did know was white supremacy. What they did know is that they ran from down south. They migrated up north, running away from white Christians, hanging and burning and dismembering black people. So the African American that suffered under the oppression of slavery, all while being taught Christianity, had always questioned how come our fellow Christian brothers are acting like devils and doing things that are more in line with what the devil would have done, as opposed to what this white Jesus is supposed to be about. And so Islam, as Zahir Ali, the brother that spoke before him, alluded to was presented as a correction to and an answer to that question that the Christian African American Christian had. And what they were told was that the Bible was being misinterpreted, that the Bible and the Quran were ancient African books or ancient black books, where that this history and this narrative has been stolen and misappropriated, and that the story of Jesus and Moses and Abraham that they knew from the Bible was also found in this book, and that this new book was actually part of our stolen black legacy, which is the truth. It doesn't belong to the foreigners, and it's only alien to us because it was this information, this knowledge of your past history, your knowledge of self was taken away, and in its stay you were given this slave religion of Christianity. So that's why the segment earlier was a nod to Christianity, because the truth of the matter is that Islam was attractive to black people because Christianity had failed them, and Christianity had been associated with their oppressors. So there's an attempt to, one, weave this narrative of why black people are Muslims without pointing the finger at white supremacy, and without pointing a finger towards the black or Afrocentric or black focused narrative that's presented by groups like Elijah Muhammad, leaders like Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, and individuals like the Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish Science Temple. So they're trying to again create a bridge over these two black centered movements that are more instrumental in the state of current black Islam, or maybe not the current state, because the current state has gone back to sleep due to the heavy influence of foreign Muslims like this man here, and that came in 1965 after the Immigration and Naturalization Act. The system, in an attempt to neutralize the nation and neutralize the connection and the power that came behind black nationalism mixed with Islam. They assassinated Malcolm and also changed the immigration laws to allow the influx of foreign Muslims from the Middle East and Asia and parts of Africa. And essentially the African American narrative and focus went from black nationalism and black liberation to the religion and the fact that the white man wasn't no longer the devil, because how could the white man be the devil and this white man here on the screen be the devil? Your Muslim brother that's also white, how can they both be the devil? So this is propaganda at its highest level.
Not just military and physical colonialism, but mental colonialism. Islam is seized by some African Americans in the 1920s to articulate their dreams to be free and dignified and liberated. And that appeals to men and women.
So you have new types of religious...
See, when he says to be free, there's also justice, because not only are you looking to be free, but what are you looking to be free from? You're looking to be free from oppression, from the devil, from the white man that's oppressing you. And it's not just freedom of religion, it's freedom, justice, because something has to be done. There has to be some justice at some point. this is a very foreign. This is a foreign Muslim's take on what happened, and that's why that's very important that this African American Muslim woman is being told and taught by there's my man's Ahmediyya Ali. I like him, but he's not an African American. He's also of Indian descent. So there's not a black man in articulating any of this history here. And so that also needs to be pointed out. If they want to talk about the pioneers, and if they want to talk about Islam in the 20s, especially for black Americans, you should have found a black American with some narrative or with some authenticity, as opposed to relying on these academics to tell you your history as if they know it.
Movements coming into the space in which working class black Americans,
Deuce Ali, he's again, don't mention their names, they show the pictures. He was influence on Marcus Garvey. That's where Marcus Garvey got the language of one God, one destiny, one people. So the Tawheed that's present in the conversation or the agenda of Marcus Garvey is influenced by this brother. I'll just pause for that call. Pause for the call. Shout out to Deuce Muhammad Ali.
Migrants are engaging.
Drew Ali.
For Florence, one of the encounters that she has is with a group called the Ahmediyya Movement in Islam, a South Asia-based movement in which its leader arguably declared himself a prophet. So on the one hand...
So, here we go. You don't mention a black man. You show his picture. You show Deuce Ali. He was a foreigner, but let's call him a black man. You have Noble Drew Ali. You show his picture. You don't mention his name. You show Elijah Muhammad. You show his picture. Don't mention his name. But you show these dusty Arabs or Indians, Ahmediyya Movement. Now you've interjected Ahmediyya into the lexicon and the consciousness of a bunch of people who may not have even known about Ahmediyya and Ghulam Ahmed. And his whole, like I said, his whole movement was deemed by the Muslim world to be heretical. He might have had a death sentence put on him. But that's it's okay to highlight Ghulam Ahmed and name him, but the black man goes unnamed. So I'm not on my watch.
And the Ahmadiyya were very orthodox in the sense that they brought traditional Islamic practices, and on the other hand, they were quite unorthodox because of the structure of their movement.
Not because of the structure, because of the
one of the reasons
doctrine.
Why they're so important is they put more resources, time and talent into trying to proselytize on behalf of Islam in non-Muslim countries all over the world. In the early 1920s, the Ahmadis ascended a mission.
Ahmadiyyas of yesterday are no different than, let's say, the Saudi Salafis of the 2000s. It's a movement that has a particular take on Islam. There's not so much movement, upward mobility within the Muslim world where people have their own version of Islam or can challenge you on your version. So in order to have growth, you have to go to places where this is a new idea. So they had a very dynamic dawah program that went all over the world, spreading their bid'ah, their particular brand of heretical Islam.
Muhammad Sadiq, to the United States.
He was quickly, as a missionary, looking for a new place to find a headquarters.
Looked like he was in Earth, Wind,
and so
Fire,
he saw
too.
Chicago. He saw it as a place where he could proselytize to African Americans, where there was a spirit of political, cultural movement.
One of the things that he says, in Islam, there is no difference between the prince and the pauper. There is no racism. All pray together to the same God. He practices what he preaches because in St. Louis, he appoints a black man, P. Nathaniel Johnson, Sheikh Ahmad-Din, to be the head of an Ahmadi mission that is multiracial.
All right, so if you can, if you appoint someone, you appoint an African American to the head of a movement that has an Indian figurehead, he is not the head of this movement. He's a spokesman for your particular brand of Islam. And unlike the Nation of Islam, whose doctrine itself was black-centered, the Ahmediyya movement's narrative is not black-centered at all. It's Ahmadiyya-centered. So everything is going to be pointing back to Ghulam Ahmed and pointing back to India or whatever the case may be. And so the idea that that's like saying Desmond Tutu, a black Catholic priest, was at the head of his movement or the Catholic Church in South Africa, when the white Pope is his boss. So who's the boss? Desmond Tutu or the Pope? We all know the answer is the Pope. So to try to frame this situation as anything different is no different than today when a Salafi student of knowledge is given the green light by his sheikh or to be a teacher or imam or something, and then once he says something or realizes that he's a pawn in someone else's game, the overseas handler gets to essentially undermine him and take away his leadership and have his people flip on him. Why? Because he's not actually the leader. He's okay as long as he's in their good graces. So they're actually the shot caller, not him. So this is the same game that's been played over and over again, and you're going to continue to have people playing in your face as long as you continue to allow it. You know, so they were going for it in 1920, and you know, and it seems like they're ready to go for it again today. Well, let's get back into it.
That is white, that is black, and that is brown. For African Americans to have a stake in this, it's not just, they're not just following a foreigner here.
Yes, they are.
It's becoming their own tradition.
In Chicago, Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, he set up the Mosque Cultural Center on Wabash Avenue on the south side in Bronzeville.
And it's bold. It clearly says Masjid Lillah, the Mosque of God, and it has a big onion dome. He's not trying to be subtle.
So how did Florence encounter the Ahmadiyya?
After she's in Evanston, she moves back to Bronzeville, where she becomes a cook for a fraternity house. That boarding house is not far from the Ahmadiyya, yeah, not far from Wabash Avenue, exactly. So perhaps Florence had kind of walked by, maybe they had handed her some literature, as people who proselytize do. Maybe she had looked at it, put it in her purse, kept walking. Maybe the second time she had stopped and
Look, here's
talked.
your man right here, Hazrat Ghulam Ahmed, the promised Messiah and Mahdi. So they had the sis basically somehow subjugating herself to this guy. You know what I mean? That's called dirty, that's nasty work, as they say. God, Jesus Christmas.
To the person giving her the literature. And maybe the third time or the fourth time, she decided to go in. And so we find here in 1922 in the Muslim Sunrise, so you see here this list of new converts. It says 116 gentlemen and ladies have accepted Islam. And if you move down here, you find Florence's name right here.
I mean, how many of these names? Muhammad, Aziz Muhammad, Hussein. Okay, these are pretty standard names. I'm looking for a Khan, like Farrakhan and what have you, because these are not necessarily Islamic names. These are just names that Muslims have.
Mrs. Florence Watts.
Zainab in parentheses.
Yeah, it was Zainab, and so she also chose a new name.
Interesting.
Which is really beautiful, right? To be able to choose a new identity that connects you with a new purpose, a transnational, global community.
When I first came across...
Okay, so this goes into the escapism that's being promoted by these foreigners to black Muslims, and it's being practiced today. So black people have a hard time organizing and operating within their own realities of themselves as blacks in America, yet you're going to be connected to this international community. Now think about 1930, how realistic is the connection to the international community for some marginalized black women in Chicago. You know, so you find that today that black people, and so black Muslims in particular, have been enamored with the cultures and the countries of the Muslim world, and have over the time lost sense of what's going on in their own reality, and is particularly, when I say own, the black American. So it's like you Muslim more than you are black American. In your mind, in your body, in your reality is within the you live within the black American context, but within your consciousness and your spirituality, you're part of some other reality. And a lot of black Muslims spend their lives trying to close the distance between that which exists in their minds and in their spirituality with their bodies, by putting their bodies to work on behalf of foreigners in foreign countries, and even here in America.
The picture of Florence. I thought, she's wearing kind of strange clothes. She might have converted into something that may not have been with full acknowledgement of what she was taking on. And then I think, why did I think that?
That's what people think when they see us.
She's trauma
like,
bonded.
Who made her do that?
I look at it now with a sense of awe that she could make this decision for herself, and she decided to buck the trend. And though there was no one else around her,
we often discount, especially for women, their own agency. We do them a discredit by not allowing them to show up just the way they are, believing that that's the way they wanted to show up.
That picture, she does not look bothered, and I think there's power in that.
As a Muslim in contemporary society, what I found most fascinating about this photo was their clothing. They're wearing what you might expect of African American women of this time, but on the other hand, they have these drapings, which, you know, I ultimately, after looking at them a few times, realized these are bed sheets. There was a creativity and an ingenuity and an innovation to their process.
So it went from identifiably Muslim clothing to church hats and blankets. I don't know how much ingenuity or creativity that is. You know, that's, if you ask me, that's othering. There's no industry that comes from that. That's no, industry is driven by innovation. So if you create something, then you can sell that. So unless you are selling blankets, and now blankets wrapping a blanket around you became a black Muslim thing, and then now you were able to find a new application for your blankets. This is lazy. And again, it's no criticism of these ladies in the past from the 1920s. I'm more concerned with how this is being framed. And apparently this woman is Muslim as well. So it's just interesting how they want to emphasize, whatever it is that they want to emphasize, however they want to emphasize it. And so that's called narrative building. They're weaving this narrative together with evidence that is incongruent. There's almost no connection, or there's marginal connection, and they're trying to make it the major connection when there is no major connection.
It reminds us how much coming to Islam for many African Americans in the 1920s is not just political, and it's not just spiritual. It's also aesthetic and material.
I think so much of it is guided by this need for independence, this need for ownership of things that we might even take for granted today. Our name, our self, our religious expression.
So she converts in 1922. What did it mean for her life going forward?
On Wabash Avenue, they had regular...
I don't know, independence. Like, how much of this claiming or self-determination can you really attribute to these women when in fact they are taking on names that they are given? They're taking on a religious expression that's not theirs. They're I guess they're being told that they have to cover themselves a certain way, and I guess in an attempt to do so, they grab blankets and throw it over their shoulders. So this is not, again, your own agency. So it's dangerous to frame it like this, because Black people are not allowed to know what your own agency looks like. It's not your own agency to be told what something is. It's not your own agency to be told what Islam is. Essentially, without having the wherewithal to verify and check. Because for all intents and purposes, this Ahmediyya movement is not even accepted in the Muslim world as Islam. So what other practices were these women exposed to or compelled to engage in, changing their names, that's have nothing to do with Islam?
Reading groups where women would read and teach each other Quran. They learned Arabic. They were learning about their brothers and sisters abroad in the Punjab. So it really
they didn't have no brothers and sisters in the Punjab.
A different space. And that's why I find it so compelling that there's an image of 4 women. They were sisters in Islam that talked to each other and congregated with each other and learned about the faith together.
8 years after the photograph was taken, we find Florence in the census again, now reunited with her family in Bronzeville. But Florence's new faith couldn't insulate her from the challenges of life as a Black woman in early 20th century America. In 1932, her daughter Aurelia died during an operation that went wrong.
There's actually an item in the newspaper, and you can see here, coroner's jury exonerated Dr. Fred C. Cade, one of the wealthiest and best-known physicians in the city, from responsibility in the death of Miss Aurelia Watts, 18-year-old girl who died at Daly's.
Okay, so I want to take a moment here to point out and the fact that, again, your religion and your connection to your so-called brothers and sisters in Karachi doesn't change the condition of your actual reality, which is the fact that you are a black woman in 20th century America. So her daughter apparently was the victim of a medical malpractice where someone performed an illegal operation. She died, but the physician was a wealthy white man, and the jury exonerated her. So, you know, the Ahmediyya movement, did it come in to give some duress to black people from their reality as black people here in North America? Did it relieve their oppression? Was it, to tell me that in Islam there's no racism means absolutely nothing, when the fact of the matter is the world we live in, or the country we live in, is steeped in racism. And so the Ahmediyya movement did not resolve her situation, did not create a hospital for black people to be treated with justice, did not create a school or businesses or institutions to further or better the lives of black people. No, they were preoccupied with their own mission, which was to get a foothold in America, and they used black Americans, as people often do, immigrant communities often do, to gain a foothold in America. And so they reported back to their people what they were concerned with, but they did nothing, to relieve these women from the oppression, from the society that they operated in. Did they sue on behalf of this woman, or did they find any way to again, justice? Or did they find a way to get some justice for the sister? Did they file a lawsuit, class action? What did the Ahmadiyya movement do? Tangibles. Not some mythology, not some feel good. Oh, the Muslims, Islam doesn't promote racism. There's racism all over the Muslim world, and this relationship with the Ahmadiyya movement may have been more exploitative than anything else. And so, this has to be checked.
Hospital last Saturday.
It's this last sentence that strikes me. The coroner's jury returned a verdict of death by manslaughter, but named no one responsible.
Could she call on Ghulam Ahmed or like the Ben Crump? Where was the Ahmadiyya movement when she needed them?
Just 1 year later, Florence died, aged about 55. But the movement she was part of, the attempt by Black Americans to find new meaning and purpose through Islam, continued.
So here you go. Now they want to create this false narrative that the Nation of Islam is somehow connected to the Ahmadiyya movement. They show pictures of Elijah Muhammad. They show Elijah Muhammad. They show the nation. But like Lord Voldemort, they dare not mention his name. The Ahmadiyya movement that taught there's no racism and you can pray next to everybody. The Nation of Islam ain't teach that. The Nation of Islam was pro-black. They had a black narrative. And I don't know, there's all types of people watching this, so somebody might point out the presence of Master Farad Muhammad, and some people might even say, well, Master Farad was a member of the Ahmediyya movement. He did come from India, or whatever case may be, and let's give you that. But as you can see here, this is the Nation of Islam. That's Elijah Muhammad. That's Elijah Muhammad. That's Elijah Muhammad. That's Elijah Muhammad. That's Sister Clara Muhammad. And this is the MGT. This is clearly a black woman and black men all centered, front and centered in the Nation of Islam doctrine and their expression. So that is the fact of the matter of the influence, how Islam influenced black America in the 1920s in Chicago. Started with them and ended with them. And you would have to work deliberately to try to make some connection and cut out the connective tissues so this is again narrative. This is narrative creation.
The Nation of Islam is coming into an already vibrant and diverse Islamic scene. But after World War II, it will become by far the largest Muslim organization of any kind in this country.
Right. So modern Islam, where it is today, is a reflection of that fact. Not no Ahmediyya movement. Man, woman, and child. You know what I'm saying? They show that sister, they cut the husband out for a whole scene. There's no separation here. Okay? And this is solely about black America and the liberation of black America through the vehicle of Islam. So the connection between liberation for black people and Islam is made emphatically within the Nation of Islam doctrine, unlike the Ahmadiyya doctrine. So that's why the Ahmadiyya doctrine doesn't have a Malcolm X. The Ahmadiyya doctrine doesn't have a Muhammad Ali, doesn't have the connectivity and the influence in the African American community, today, because they were seen then, as they are now, as a foreign doctrine. And the idea that, you can pray next to whoever, that's cool, that's all fine and dandy. But that's not what black America needs. That's not what it needed then. It's not what it needs now. And so this is what's being pushed as the focus, as though this is some type of quality that benefits black people. That doesn't address the concerns and the needs of black America now or black America then, whether who you could pray next to. This is tricknology.
By the time the Nation of Islam is taking root in Chicago, Florence is gone, but the community that she was a part of and the echoes.
By the time the Nation of Islam takes root, the Nation of Islam's root from the seed was started around the same time. By the time Florence is gone, the Nation of Islam tree and root has already developed into a tree with branches. So he this is Zahir Ali, you my man and all, but damn, cut it out, fam.
Of her presence are picked up by the work of the Nation of Islam.
No, it's not.
Florence is part of this evolving presence of Islam in America, and certainly in Black America.
On Wabash Avenue today, the mosque Florence attended has gone. It's been replaced by a modern building where members of the Ahmediyya movement still meet to pray.
Did they build that hospital yet?
Their
Ahmediyya?
presence is a reminder of the early flowering of Islam among Black American communities and the inspiration Florence's life can still provide today.
Pioneers. I don't remember ever seeing a photograph of Muslim women from way back then.
You know, you hear those stories about the incredible men in our tradition, our community who have done so much, and you assume that there must have been women that were pioneers in their own right. But I think to have real kind of photo evidence of that, the community at that time and those individuals in Florence recognized that this would be something that would be important enough for people to look back on years later.
It was the Ahmediyya movement that took those pictures for the purpose of reporting back to their headquarters in Karachi the work that they were doing as missionaries. So if you're being funded and you're being sent out to do some work, people want to have documentation of the work that you're doing. So those photographs were taken and sent back to the people of Karachi and Ahmediyya movements, I guess maybe globally, to show that's proof of concept and proof of work. And again, African Americans have to stop being pedestrian and having people explain to them what the hell is going on. And people from outside of their communities. If you don't have institutions, you still don't have doctors, you still don't have hospitals, and you still have Black women dying at the hands of white men in robes. You have work to do, and the work has to start with your understanding of the situation that you're in and what needs to be done to rectify the situation. Joining the Ahmediyya movement ain't it. Wasn't then and it ain't now. And framing this situation as this is attempting to do takes the light away from one of the, if not the most dynamic iteration of Islam in America has ever seen, especially as it pertains to Black people, which is the Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad. I mean, that's pretty much the end of this video, so we could wrap that up. But I think that we need to be careful and be mindful that the mind and the body and the soul of the Black man in America has always been tapped into for the causes of other people other than yourself. And it's important that other people have control of your mind and your body and your soul for all intents and purposes, so that you don't have time to cultivate those things for your own purposes. You can't do something for yourself if you're busy doing something for someone else, and that is the intention. And they're trying to normalize that. I think this sister Malika Bilal, the narrator of this documentary, she works for Al Jazeera. So, you know, can she work for Beanpot Chronicles? Sure, hit me up. But working for foreigners and foreign Muslims and pretending as though, you know, because we're all Muslim, that this is yours, you know, this is what's being normalized. And they want to bury the community that taught do for self, and by self meant Black Muslim and not just everybody. And it's okay to be kumbaya once you've already established what's yours. But if you don't have anything, you're not doing kumbaya, you're doing somebody come save me. And that needs to be rectified and straightened out. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up this evening. Next up, Malcolm X Paradox Part 2. Until then, inshallah, always stay with the right state of mind, stay prayed up, and I'll see you on the other side. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.